14 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Palm Industries. I have maintained for a long time that pepper spray is a way underused tool in law enforcement, and I get it. When you have to arrest someone, you do not want to have to get that stuff on you. But in personal defense or concealed carry scenarios, you want to create standoff and increase the distance, not go hands-on. I can tell you hundreds of stories about confrontations I have been involved with in real life that were resolved with some form of less lethal long before a gun would have been an option. Why not carry some in your pocket? Palm pepper spray is small, easy to carry, and it's effective. If you need something in between harsh words and a gun, this is a $12 solution. It's available on Amazon, makes a great gift. Go check them out at palmpepperspray.com. That's palm, P-O-M, pepperspray.com.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
So Jim couldn't make it today, but I want to take some time to talk about wellness. A lot of time and attention and money have been put towards wellness programs lately. People are all about this at an organizational level. You're seeing these resources get dumped into this, and I think that's a good thing. It's long overdue. But there's another side of it that I want to spend some time talking about tonight, and that has to do with your own personal responsibility to take care of yourself, because no program, no employee benefit, no gym membership, none of that is going to do it for you if you are not committed to your own growth and health and longevity and all of that. So what wellness even is something that we have to take some time for, because right now it's sort of a buzzword. People are throwing this around left and right, and it means a lot of things. That's why it's a buzzword. It's very comprehensive, right? It means diet, nutrition. It means exercise, fitness, health. Longevity is a big part of this, like living a long and happy life and having a long and successful career. Your performance is affected by wellness. This isn't just about the warm and squishy stuff, but also the more healthy you are, the more well you are, the better you will be at your job, the better your cognitive function will be, the better your learning will be, and your growth. All of that stuff is tied in. There's a lot of carryover. And ultimately, your happiness is tied to wellness, right? And happiness is fleeting. We have good times, we have bad times, and we have to learn how to cope with those things. And with all of that comes balance. A big part of wellness is being balanced. And this is a challenge because people like us in busy and demanding careers are always struggling to find that. And last week, Jim and I were talking, we were at a conference, and he was talking about the wellness stuff. And he's like, people have gotten so serious about wellness to the point that they're not doing their damn jobs anymore, right? They're taking all that me time. They're taking time to focus on themselves. They're taking on that time for that, mental health and going to the gym and working out and doing all these things. And that's good, except that we work in jobs of consequence, and there are responsibilities and obligations that we have to uphold. And so finding balance is a big part of this. How do you balance having your nose to the grindstone all the time and kicking your ass at work with slowing down and having a breath of fresh air from time to time, and making sure that you have your own mental health in order and you're taking care of your body and your family and finding some happiness, some zen, that's a big deal. So we'll hit on a couple things, but this is going to be a little warmer and fuzzier and squishier, and I get that. But I want you to see the carryover in terms of how this really affects your performance. Something to ask yourself is, are you just surviving in life, or are you actually living? And if you are actually living, are you just living, or are you thriving? And part of where you get this kind of synergy in life with when it comes to this wellness stuff is when everything kind of comes together and it contributes to your well-being in a way that you go to work and you're more successful and you perform better, right? You're more in the moment. You have better focus. Your cognition is up. You can process things, in a way that is with clarity, right? All of that stuff will tie into your performance. And so even though it's a little warm and fuzzy, there are some tactical implications, right? And at the end of the day, as most of us know, us old guys, military veterans, retired cops, they tend to not stick around for a long time. And why is that, right? We have a lifetime or a career's worth of bad lifestyle choices, bad sleep, bad diet, not enough exercise, not the right kind of exercise. We've all got some post-traumatic stress of some form or another, maybe some bad coping mechanisms, and even just shitty attitudes. The shitty attitudes is something that, in terms of wellness, this is like a big thing, because being like salty and disgruntled all the time takes its own toll on your mental health. And you have to figure out how to have some inner peace with all of that, right? So we'll hit on there's a little bit of research on some of this stuff. It is real. We'll talk on some tools and all of that. But my point in all of this is that it ultimately is on you. Your own wellness is a product of your own actions and discipline and self-control and self-awareness and all of that. The way that you find balance is on you. Now, I'm no expert in this by any means. Trust me, I'm still figuring this out as I go here. And by no stretch have I mastered it. I'm just trying to point you in the direction of some things that have helped me along the way. And a lot of it is I'm just relaying stuff that I either read somewhere or someone else told me. But it's all been something that has helped me kind of grow and develop as a person. And I think if you talk to a lot of us old guys, you'll find that we wish we figured some of this out sooner. I think that's something that is pretty consistent among people with some time and tenure behind them is, man, we should have been doing this all along. So that's a big part of it. There's a thing that Mike Pannone has been known to say, and he's been on the podcast before. He's a world-class shooter. He has a really compelling tactical background. And one of the things that he always says is the magic is that there is no magic. And that is 100% true here too. You have to do the work. So in terms of life advice and just wisdom and whatever else, just understand that this stuff doesn't just come naturally. This is something that you have to put some effort and energy into. And what I have found is that the payoff is worth it. One of the things that we talk a lot about on this show is leadership. And if you look around your circles, your professional or personal circles, you know who the leaders are, the charismatic people, the intelligent, well-organized, successful people in your groups, whatever that looks like. And I think one of the things that we need to wrap our head around when it comes to wellness is that leading ourselves is often one of the hardest things to do. So to that end, one of the recurring themes in this conversation is going to be about taking control of the things in your life that you can control. There's a lot that you can't. And we talked about the bad attitudes, right? The things that get us all worked up. You talk about religion or politics at the Thanksgiving table. Well, that's a real easy place to get your blood pressure up, right? And people get emotional and people are very passionate about these things and all of that, but you can't control how other people feel or think about those things. You can only control your own actions, your own attitudes, and finding some peace with accepting the things that you can't control is a big part of leading yourself. And I think when you have a good sense of that, the things you can control and the things that you can't, it brings you some clarity that helps you find that peace, right? There's a famous quote by a guy named Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist and he was also a Holocaust survivor that lived in concentration camps for a little while. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And one of his famous quotes is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that quote and just my awareness of his book and all of that was something that I originally learned in therapy, which we're going to talk about. But it prompted me to read the book, and it's great because you could see this guy who went through this horrible, horrible thing. And there was so much that he could not control, but he was able to find some peace and control the way that he was going to behave and act and his attitudes towards it, right? His own sense of gratitude and happiness for the things that he did have was something that he could take some positive control over. And I think it's really compelling to read it from the perspective of someone that lived that kind of life in terms of some of the things that we tend to bitch and complain about, right? Not being pissed off and salty all the time is something that you have to practice. And we see it constantly. It's like cancerous. It's toxic, right? You see the people at work that are just like, they have nothing positive to say. And it's like at some point, you have to be able to let that stuff go, right? So a big theme here is the things that you can control versus the things that you can't. So to that end, before we get into some of the therapy and some of that stuff, the first thing I want to talk about is just our relationships. I mentioned that you could be around the Thanksgiving table and people talk religion and politics. People get all fired up and pissed off and passionate, and everyone's very emotional, right? And your relationships is something that is wide reaching, right? It's not just your partner or spouse in life. It's also just your friends and your family and your professional relationships as well. And these are things that you have to foster. And I think this is important on the wellness aspect because at some point, having that circle is a form of support that you can lean into. And as much as we like to be independent and self-sufficient and not have to rely on other people, that's all well and good. But we tend to group up, right? In the workplace, we're going to have times where we have to collaborate with somebody, or we have to get ideas from somebody, or we have to get approval from somebody, or we have to like sell someone on something, right? We have to be effective. And those interpersonal skills go a long way. And I think when it comes to being successful, having those relationships and building positive relationships around you is something that will only contribute to that like attitude. The people that you choose to be around, that you choose to engage with, and the energy that you exchange between those people. Again, it sounds kind of foofy, I know, but that's going to affect your happiness and ultimately your wellness, right? Having those good relationships. So when people trust you at work and when you trust other people, I think that goes a long way. When you can communicate things, when you can be kind of vulnerable, those are all things that are part of your relationships. Again, personally, professionally, or otherwise. And you have to constantly maintain those things and foster those things. Because there might come a point where there's this like shock to your system, right? Where something falls apart, or you need help, or you need advice or something, and you've got to go and ask for it. And having those things established will be beneficial, right? And there was a period of time where I was so wrapped up in like, I go to work, I come home, I take care of the family, I go back to work, I come home, I deal with chores, take care of the family, go back to work, and it's just this cycle, and it just can eat at you, And then something happens and you're like, man, I've been neglecting, like, who are my friends anymore? Like, I got people that I know and that I trust and that I talk to, but I've been neglecting. I've not been a good friend to them. And there might come a point where not only I need them, but there might also come a point that they need me. And those relationships go a long way when you can be the person, the source of support when someone else needs it. So it goes both ways. And again, no one's going to do that for you. You have to be very intentional about those things. So it's important that we see the way those personal relationships affect our lives and the big picture, not only, in terms of, like I said, support and just general happiness and all of that, but there's some carryover into the professional world as well. When it comes to relationships, one of the big wellness lessons that I've struggled with is boundary setting. And I admit I'm still working on this, and this is really hard. And it applies, like I said, in your romantic relationships, in relationships with friends and family, and especially at work, right? This is hard. But boundary setting is one of those things, again, that you can take some control over in terms of balance. And the problem, what most people struggle with, and what I've certainly struggled with, is when we set boundaries, we are setting some sort of expectation for someone else to meet, right? We insist on some compliance or compromise from another person, whether that's a significant other or spouse, or it's our bosses, right? We expect that our bosses are just going to like recognize when we're burnt out or we're struggling to maintain, but that's not how it works, right? People like us, people who are very driven, the sort of people that are listening to a show like this, have a hard time saying no in some cases. And a lot of times when we do set boundaries, we say something like, hey, if you do X, then I'm going to do Y. And it's like a threat, right? We're expecting someone else to meet that expectation. And the problem with that is you can't control what someone else is going to do, right? It's entirely dependent on someone else's actions and their free will and their behaviors and patterns and habits and tendencies and all of that. So going back to the things you can control and the things that you can't, understanding that boundary setting is a personal thing, right? It's not for other people. Setting boundaries has more to do with, hey, if this person does X or Y, then I'm going to do Z. It's about what you are going to do. And you have only yourself to hold accountable for that. And if you don't, then that's on you. Then you have to either redefine it or hold yourself, ask yourself some difficult questions. And when it comes to things like work, and this is, again, all this ties back to balance, right? Balance between personal and professional lives and our own well-being and taking care of others because we all have obligations. One of the things that happens at work is, your bosses, you're a hard worker. They get used to your work ethic and you always deliver. So you're dependable and they can count on you. So they ask you to take on extra tasks, or they give you extra responsibilities, or they call you on the weekend, or they expect you to read your email when you're not working. And unless you manage those expectations with effective boundaries, it's going to eat at you, right? It's going to blur the lines. We like to work hard, right? We enjoy the hustle, and that's fine. But this is one of the things about wellness and balance you have to understand is that life is a marathon and not a sprint. And if you want to thrive, right, then you need to pace yourself, set that pace. So frame boundaries around like, if they do X, then I'm going to do Y. That's a you thing, not a them thing. Does it suck that sometimes people are going to do whatever X is? Yes, it sure does. But you can only control what you can control, and that's what you're going to do. So relationships, I think you need to take time, go out of your way to foster those things, both personally and professionally, and be intentional about having friends and having good relationships, and also about being a good friend and a good partner and a good employee, or whatever that means to you. And one of the ways that you do that is with good boundaries. It might seem counterintuitive, but it's true. About work. One of the things that I think we all have to wrap our heads around are the what ifs. What if I lose my job? What if I become disabled? And the reason I bring this up when it goes to the longevity piece in terms of wellness is I mentioned earlier how a lot of people in public safety jobs especially tend to not stick around for very long after retirement. And a lot of that is because their sense of identity has been tied to the profession for so long, right? I mean, part of it is just the lifestyle, right? It's bad on sleep. It's bad on health. It sets us up for all kinds of conditions, right? Health conditions, mental health conditions. They're hard miles. So there's that side of it. But the other side of it is like we're tied to this thing. We're connected to it. And like you're a sheepdog or whatever, right? And then when you're not a sheepdog anymore, you're a has-been, you lose some of that sense of identity. And now that like ability to thrive, like we talked about, like you just go into sort of survival mode. Or maybe you're living fine, you're comfortable, you're just getting by, but you're not thriving, right? You lose that sense of self. And on the wellness front, like one of the things that you need to think about is that sense of self, and recognize that the type of people that do the jobs that we do and that ultimately become good life partners or good friends or good coworkers or good teammates or whatever is not tied to that thing, right? It's tied to the fact that you're a good person with good morals and strong character, and good people with good character and morals can do lots of things and be successful, even if things are taken away from you. And this is a big deal because not only do I think about it in terms of your job, right? If you lose your job or you make a mistake and you get fired or whatever, but the idea is like those sorts of things and others, I'm sure, can cause people to spiral. And you can have really good times and things can be great. And you have to enjoy it while it lasts because it won't maybe be around forever. But the lesson in that is that when the bad times come and you hit the lows, you get in the slump, those are temporary too. And those come and go as well. And there's always going to be something else to look forward to. And I think when it comes to framing your own attitude about things and leading yourself and finding balance, you have to kind of embrace that. So I think that's a big lesson, is to consider the what ifs. What would you do if? And recognize and figure out, like, how am I going to be okay? How am I going to get around this? How am I going to get through it? And resilience is a big part of wellness. So take some time to just kind of think about that. So speaking of ups and downs, when it comes to wellness, we got to talk about coping, right? How do you feel better? How do you deal with the bad and build that resilience that we're talking about? For one thing, we already talked about the relationships, and that's a place that you can lean for support. And you might not feel like you ever need it, but there might come a time and a place where you didn't think you would, but you really, really do. And the reason that's helpful is just talking things out sometimes can go a long way in helping you process. And using a little bit of rationality or getting some external feedback, right? Someone that's like kind of on the outside looking in, that can be enough sometimes to help us deal with the emotions that life throws at us at times. Whether that's a bad call, right? Something ugly that you saw you had to deal with at work, or whether that's a hurdle that you're dealing with family drama, right? Life drama, just whatever that is, having like an external look can help. Someone that you could trust, someone that you can vent to and that you can talk out loud and use words to process those emotions. That's a really big deal. And I bring that up because there's a time and a place where maybe just talking to that support network that you have is not enough and you need the help of a professional. I mentioned the therapy thing, and there's some research about this that's really interesting. And basically there's a lot of types of therapy out there, different methodologies, different levels of certification, different types of certifications that people will use to be a counselor or a therapist. For example, not all of them are doctors. Sometimes they just have like a certificate. And what a lot of the research says is like they all work. They're all effective. There's not a necessarily one that's the best or better or worse than others. Is they all have their time and place, and it's because it's not so much the methodology or the philosophy behind it as much as the act of going, right? Of taking time to sit down with someone and be vulnerable and open up and process those things and kind of get that, judgment-free input and insight from people. And certainly some therapists are better than others. The doc that I go to is amazing. And there was a period of time that I had to see a different provider. And, they were okay. They were still good, but they were not like my doc. My doc was awesome. And so I'm back to seeing my doc, and I'm grateful for her. She's definitely helped me grow and change as a person. So that's great. But understand that the help of a professional might be worth your time. And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to do it because there's anything particularly wrong or you're in some sort of crisis. It can just be a place that you can process through some stuff and ultimately open up, right? Use words. And that's sometimes just that is enough. But the help of a professional can be worthwhile. Speaking of doctors, there's also a time and a place where just talking is not enough. And maybe you need to talk to your primary about getting some medication to help you. And again, like on the wellness thing, I get it. Like none of us want to be on meds, right? We don't want to feel like there's something wrong with us. We don't want the influence of some chemical and all of that. But what you need to know about medication, if you need it, is that it doesn't have to be a permanent thing, right? Sometimes it's just to help you get over a hurdle. And I'll open up and share a little bit of my personal experience. There was a period of time a little while back that I was dealing with like significant anxiety. And it was really impacting my sleep. I was having trouble sleeping, and that was affecting my work, and it was interfering with a lot, right? And so there came a point where I went and I talked to my doc about it, and they gave me some meds that I could use to help me sleep and to help manage my anxiety during the day. And it wasn't anything crazy. It was literally like an antihistamine, right? Not Benadryl, but something like it, right? Prescription only, that helped me keep my calm and fall asleep when I needed to sleep. And it's not habit forming, totally safe. But just that by itself was, getting better sleep, getting rest, helped me cope with the slump that I was in. And in the meantime, I was able to process through stuff and keep going to therapy and working through some of the other things that I'm going to tell you about. But there's nothing wrong with that, right? You're dealing with stuff, right? There might be some brain chemistry that you need to correct a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. Go ask about it. You don't have to commit to anything, but I just want to say, like, when it comes to taking care of yourself and getting through difficult times, there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. It's probably more common than you think. And, at the end of the day, like, no one has to know about it. You don't have to tell them if you don't want to, but I do want to, like, take some of that stigma away and say, like, hey man, yeah, I got some medication to help me sleep because I was having a hard time. Not a big deal, right? So nothing wrong with that. If you're struggling, talk to your doctors. So some other coping skills that you can do on your own. We've talked about a lot of things, right? So kind of from the top, we talked about, this is all about finding balance and leading yourself and recognizing the things that we can control and the things that we can't, right? And one of the things that we can control is our own attitude and how we respond to certain situations. And we want to build good relationships because that's our support system. And having good relationships also means good boundaries because that's part of finding balance. That's all connected, right? We want to ask ourselves, what happens if the things that we love in life or the things that we value or cherish are taken away from us? And make sure that we don't lose our own sense of self and sense of well-being. Because there are going to be ups and downs. Things are going to, people and careers and, whatever, things in life come and go. So make sure that you build the tools and the coping skills that you need to be resilient before the crisis. Because although the good times and the happiness can come and go, the bad times will come, and the bad times will be a struggle. And we want to learn how to deal with that well, right? There's a program at my work that's been making the round, Struggle Well. It's like their big theme. And I really like that theme. There's a book about it. If you read the book, Struggle Well, they talk about post-traumatic growth by seeing our struggles and our challenges as opportunities. And the tools that can help you get through those bad times include talking to that support system, those relationships that you've built, right? Whether it's about work stuff that you're dealing with or personal stuff that you're dealing with, there's some overlap in all of those things. And if that's not enough, maybe you go talk to your doctor and or to a therapist, right, to help process, but also to a doctor to see if there's some medical explanation that can help, that you can correct course a little bit with, right? Or at least temporarily give you some, buy you some time. Some other things that you can take personal control over that I think are a big deal. There's basically 3 that I want to talk about: journaling, meditation, and having an outlet, or several outlets for that matter. All of these things, well, all the stuff that we've talked about, but especially these things have been well researched, right? And journaling specifically, to dive into that one a little bit, is something that, much like having conversations in therapy or with our friends or support network, journaling is another opportunity for us to allow our brain to associate those intense emotions that we're feeling or whatever experiences that we're dealing with, to process and express those things with words. And that makes those things more elaborate and less intense, right? When we're processing through the things that we're feeling and we take the time to use words to assign to that, and it's more elaborate, it's more detailed, and it allows us to kind of slow those feelings down a little bit and increase our awareness of them. And that makes it easier to grasp with and work through, right? And it's not just about dealing with these emotional things that we might be dealing with. It's not just about problems, right? It's also something that has been shown to help things like our memory and productivity, right? It lets us clean the slate of our subconscious, and that gives us more focus and more clarity and mental bandwidth to get things done throughout the day. And it's good for our relationships because we can approach some of the challenges that we might face. And it might not be challenges between one person and another. It could just be challenges that you're dealing with at work, right? Some professional hurdle that you're trying to get over, that as you kind of talk about that thing in your journal and process through it, you go back to work and your relationships improve because you have that sense of clarity, right? That sense of focus, and it takes some of the angst away, right? Like I said, less intense. And when it comes to relationship challenges that we might deal with, personally, professionally, or otherwise, it also lets us approach the communication that might need to happen in a more rational way, right? Less emotions, more logic. It's also good for our mental health. It gives us a place to kind of organize our thoughts in a judgment-free place, right? You don't have to, this is not a sort of thing that you have to ever refer back to. You don't ever have to read what you write again. You can write stuff out and then destroy it. The benefits are still there because you can organize your thoughts in a sense. And sometimes when you're just like, man, I gotta do this today, I gotta do that, I got all these other things this week piling up, and you're thinking about all, like, just writing out a to-do list. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, you can put it in your phone or whatever, but just the act of putting all of that into words and writing a to-do list will help you organize things and make you feel a little bit less stressed because there's some structure to it. So journaling doesn't have to be like Dear Diary. It doesn't have to be like that. It could just be sitting down at the beginning of your day and writing out your to-do list. Hey, what am I going to do today and in what order, right? It could be just showing gratitude for things. There's a lot of research in that. Just being grateful for a moment that you have, one good thing that happened that day. Not a big deal, but there's research that supports if you express that in some way, you take the time to intentionally point out the things that you're grateful for here and there. Again, it goes back to those attitudes, right? And recognizing that you're grateful for things, I think, is a big deal because you can be a little bit less salty. And I think most of the people that work in the sort of professions that we work in could all stand to be a little bit less salty. So the way that I do this, I use a method called morning pages. It's kind of an abbreviated version. If you Google this, there's some doctor came up with this idea of morning pages. It was like you take 2 or 3 blank pieces of paper and it's just stream of consciousness. You just write whatever comes to mind. You don't have to go into it with a prompt or a theme. You just start writing. The goal is to write whatever comes to mind as long as you fill up the pages. Now, I don't do 2 or 3 full-size pieces of paper that I fill up. I don't really have the time for that, but it doesn't take a lot. I just use like a field notes journal and I do 2 sides of a page, right? I open up and there's a 2-page spread. I fill those 2 up. It just takes a few minutes. Whatever I have to talk about. It doesn't have to be, again, Dear Diary. It could be my to-do list. It can be some brainstorming, right? I'm trying to tease out an idea that I want to do an episode about. And so I'm going to kind of just brainstorm and write through it, whatever, right? But just the act of doing it, stream of consciousness, that's one way that I do it. There's 1,000 other ways you can, experiment with it, see what works for you. But I actually legitimately look forward to it these days. So meditation was the next one. And meditation is not something that I've gotten as consistent with. I've done it. I try to practice it. It kind of comes in waves where I do it really well for a while and I come back to it. And you can lump a bunch of things into this. Mindfulness, breath work, yoga probably fits in. And I know that a lot of people scoff at this because it sounds real foofy and it seems a little cheesy and, snake oil, this and that. But I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of professionals at like an elite level that are doing a lot of this, right? High-end athletes, special ops dudes, pilots. There's a whole bunch of people out there that are incorporating this into their practice. And it's because the research is pretty positive for it, right? So you can scoff at them if you want, but I'm telling you that these things in the human performance realm are actually pretty common and pretty well attributed to people's success. So again, not as consistent with this. It's a work in progress. Like I said, like everything here, I definitely do it where I can though. So what you need to know from I guess, like a medical or scientific perspective, is that a lot of the stress and anxiety that you experience is a product of that sympathetic nervous response, the fight or flight response, the part of your brain that subconsciously assesses something as threatening, right? And it can be like little threat or big threat. And when it comes to this meditation and mindfulness breathwork stuff, what you're trying to do is exert some top-down control so that you can self-regulate the effects of that response. And breathing and meditation, these are some of the ways that you can take conscious control of some of those thoughts and apply some act to it that's going to help you lower your heart rate, stimulate your parasympathetic nervous response, which is where rest and recovery happens, and just generally calm yourself down. And what I have found is that a lot of people who scoff at this, or maybe they just think it's not worth their time, right? They talk about like, they don't really explore this because of the time that it takes. And that's part of it, right? Part of it is it takes a little bit of discipline to force yourself to be like, all right, I'm going to go. It only takes 5 or 10 minutes, right? 5 or 10 minutes at a time, not a big deal. But to actually take the discipline, to make it a habit, and to exert that self-control, again, as a skill, is something that like you want to learn before the crisis, right? If you wait until you're in the middle of some, whatever, anxiety-inducing event in your life that happens and things are hard to try to learn this skill, it's an uphill battle. And some people will say like, well, it's just breathing. Like it's not that hard, or it's boring, or I don't get it. And this is why it's like a little bit harder than it seems, because you'd be surprised at how much you're going through an exercise like this, taking 5 or 10 minutes to do it. And you'll start thinking about like, oh, I got to do the laundry, or there's yard work that I got to do, or the dishes need to be done, or I got to go to the grocery store. What do I need from the store? All these random things pop into your head, and being able to be like, hold on, like, let's set that aside and let's get back to breathing. I'm going to breathe in for, a count, or breathe out for a count, or maybe there's some mental imagery you associate. There's all kinds of, you can Google videos on, search videos on YouTube for mindfulness or meditation, and there's guided exercises that you can try this with. But as you go through it, you're going to find that things will pop up in your head, and what you're trying to do is learn how to push that aside and focus. And if you learn that skill, then you can apply it when things get weird and things fall apart. And this works in a tactical situation too. That adrenaline hits, your heart rate starts to spike a little bit, not because you're doing anything physical, but because of that adrenaline dump, right? The adrenaline and cortisol hit your system, fight or flight response. And sometimes you need to off gas a little bit with some deep breaths. And if you learn that skill when nothing is wrong, it's going to work a lot better when you're in the middle of shit. So don't discount the benefits of meditation, breath work, things like yoga, whatever that might be. Maybe explore that a little bit. And certainly if you are feeling stressed or strained, it's a good time to start working on that. So the last big thing, we talked about journaling, meditation, and then now outlets. Having a hobby can go a long way. Something that is completely outside of work and that is just for you, right? It's not for anybody else. It's not the family thing. It's not the work thing. It's the you thing. And this is part of like that own sense of self, that own sense of identity. And one of the classic outlets is like fitness and exercise. There's no downfall to that, right? I mean, I suppose if you overtrain or you hurt yourself, that could be a problem, but there's no downside to working out and getting fit and using exercise as an outlet to work through some of that errant energy, right? Frustration, anxiety, anger, even like the lack of energy. You're sad or you're depressed. Maybe if you get out there and you start to work hard, put some, sweat a little bit, that will help bring some energy into your life on the, as you start to come off of that, right? Coming out of the long run or coming out of that exercise, you'll be like, man, I feel good. So exercise is a classic, but also just having something that will keep your hands busy and your brain busy, right? Learn how to cook, learn how to play an instrument, learn, take up something that is creative or artistic in some way. Use the side of a brain that you're not used to using, right? Something that you can just focus on that can take you out of the real world for a few minutes and put that energy elsewhere. Woodworking, gardening, whatever. Learn how to pick locks, right? There's a practical skill for you. Lock picking, right? It's like a puzzle. So it's kind of fun. But find something and have some sort of hobby. And again, this is one of those deals that like Noah built the ark before the flood, right? And while you're at it, one of the big things about outlets is also get outside. Go get some exposure to the sun, right? Get some daylight, vitamin D. That goes a long way. Again, not much bad can come from that, but also wear sunscreen. So, full circle again. I know we've already recapped some of this. I'm going to recap it again, right? Wellness is all about your performance and thriving. It's longevity, living a long and happy life. It's taking care of your health. And there's carryover not only in your personal life, but also in your professional life. Speaking of life, there are going to be ups and downs. And while you're trying to find balance with all of those things, you need to learn how to deal with the ups and downs. And one of those things is to control and lead how you approach those things. This philosophically, your attitude, right? Seeing the positive, having good boundaries with people so that you don't get too worked up, right? Too worked up about things that are not within your control. Having those what ifs, being resilient, being like, man, what would happen? What would I do what would my plan be if this happened or that happened or the other thing? Because those good times are going to come and go, and there's bad times, but those are going to come and go too. And so when it comes to those bad times, things that you can do to help feel better, having relationships, good, positive relationships that you can lean into, go a long way. Talking to a professional and untangling some of the stuff that might be going on in your head can also go a long way. Sometimes you need the help of some medication. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Take care of yourself. The wellness that comes on the other end of that is a good thing. When I talked to the sleep doctor who we did an episode with, he said that one of the things that the medical world has spent so much time focusing on is illness. So now wellness is a big thing, and there's some criticism in the medical world. Is like all you guys do is treat illness rather than foster wellness. I thought that was an interesting perspective. So if you're in some sort of crisis or if you're feeling ill or feeling down and you need the help of some medication to get to that wellness side of things, instead of just avoiding being sick or being down, try to work on the upside, right? And do it preemptively. Other tools that you can use that you have control of, that you can do and you can, impact your life positively with. Journaling, meditation, having good outlets and hobbies. Those are things that you can do that will contribute to your wellness. No one's going to do them for you, right? Those are things that you have to exert, again, some of that top-down control over, right? Lead yourself a little bit, have some discipline, and see what benefits they bring. I know it takes a little bit of time, but they really don't cost anything. And it might be something that you'll be really glad that you have when shit hits the fan. And finally, just gratitude and wisdom. We have a lot to be grateful for. And I know that's one of those, it's like, well, yeah, no shit. Like, of course we do. But that doesn't mean that things don't piss us off. Well, yeah, but frame that well, right? The wisdom that you need to see here is, all this stuff is going to catch up with you at some point. And if all of you're doing is focusing on the negative and focusing on the bad, that's not thriving, right? You might be living, but a lot of times you're just kind of getting by. You're just kind of surviving. And you don't want to wait until you're old and dying to start to enjoy life. Take that step back, widen your view a little bit, and see the big picture. Gravitate towards the things that make you happy. Gravitate towards the things that bring good energy into your life. Music is like a big thing for me it's one of my coping mechanisms. And there's always like those sad songs that that will resonate with people. And they tend to, people connect with music, right? In a lot of ways, right? And one of the reasons is like art imitates life. You've heard that before. And I know it sounds cheesy, but there's a reason, right? There's like this personal connection with it. And I think it's just one of those things that, man, we should see that art for what it is and be like, man, it's really cool that, there are people out there that have that creative ability to, write these melodies and these words in a way that really resonate with us. Man, that's something to appreciate, right? It doesn't mean that you have to just be in this sorrow. You're listening to these songs, sad, sappy songs, and, drinking your life away because you're all whatever. That's one way to look at it. Or you can see the gratitude there and be like, hey, I'm in this slump right now, but I'm really grateful that I have, this thing to look towards. That really helps. That's kind of your way of framing your own attitude and leading yourself, I think. So that's pretty much all I got. Where I'm going with this is on the wellness front. You have your own responsibility to do some of this, and no program's going to do it for you. You're going to have ups and downs in life, and these are just some I don't know, I guess things that have helped guide me to a happier place whenever I've dealt with challenges. And I've certainly dealt with challenges throughout my life, as all of us have, right? And you've all had your ways of getting through that stuff. So I'm here to encourage you and root you on. And on the wellness thing, I just want you to think about specifically, it's not just about the line item in the budget, right? We should be putting more money into budget. We need gyms at all of our substations, which is great. Like I fully support that, but it doesn't do any good if you don't go use them. So you got to take some control over that. So be a leader and lead yourself. All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.